Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Auburn Daily Show, the Monday edition of the Auburn Daily Show. I'm Dylan Larck at You Boy the Tank on Twitter. Lance could not make it on the show, so it's just me chilling in the studio and posing the question, could Payton Thorne be the best quarterback, or at least in his words, the most proven quarterback that Hugh Freeze has ever coached, seen, watched play, the works, really? So Hugh Freeze, I think it was on May 10th, went and had an interview where he was asked a question about what he saw in Payton Thorne that he liked. And he answered with his leadership, his experience, his toughness, his football IQ. I just think he's won football games in a very good conference. And I think it elevates the room. I've said it's all about competition. And again, I want to say I'm excited about Robby Ashford. I'm excited about Holden Geriner. I look forward to that competition. It's going to make us all better if handled the right way. I think it definitely improved us. And then he would go on to say, now you're getting a quarterback that's probably more proven than any I've had before. So what I wanted to do on today's episode is kind of look through the career of Payton Thorne and compare it to the 10 years of quarterbacks that have been coached under Hugh Freeze. And that leaves guys like, I'm going to look at guys like Ryan Applin from Arkansas State, Bo Wallace, Chad Kelly, Stephen Calvert, who was the Liberty quarterback before Malik Willis got there. And then, of course, Malik Willis and the 2022 quarterbacks, which it was two, Jonathan Bennett and Caden Salter, are going to be the guys. So, yeah, just to go into Payton Thorne's skill set thus far, last season in 2022 is probably going to be what everyone's going to use to compare him to the most, because that is the season he did not have his best, or he had kind of a regressive season compared to his 2021 campaign. And it's a season where he lost Kenneth Walker, a guy that really boosted that Michigan State team to where they ended up in 2021 with the, I think, 11-2 record, I believe. But yeah, 2020, Payton Thorne got his first full year starting. 13 games, threw for 3,232 yards, 27 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. And to go game by game, he had out of the games, he had 2 games where he had 2 interceptions, and then he had 4 games where he did not throw any, or 5 games where he did not throw a single interception. And one of those was against Ohio State, which was a loss, but still, not throwing an interception against the Ohio State team is massive. And just to go to 2022 year, yeah, he regressed a little bit. The offensive line really regressed, and that's where I would put partial blame on. He did get sacked over 20 times, and he's been sacked almost 40 times in the past 2 years. So so if you go through, he still only had 2 games in 2022 where he had 2 interceptions. And then he had a few more sprinkled in with 1, and then he only had 3 games overall where he did not throw a single interception. But just looking at it like that, Payton Thorne is not your typical Hugh Freeze quarterback in the sense, or at least what we've been accustomed to seeing in the SEC at Ole Miss. He's not a gambler. He makes better choices. He does not throw the ball to the opposing defense very much. But from the standpoint of the offensive line, he's coming to an Auburn team that has greatly boosted the strength of the offensive line, at least to our knowledge. The offensive line is going to be way better than anything he's seen in his collegiate career. And if you look at it from that standpoint, I mean, he could have one of his best years he's ever had just by having a better offensive line. And maybe that 2021 year is going to be his best year because 3,000 yards is a lot. I don't think we've seen that from an Auburn quarterback in a hot minute. But looking at it like that, I think we're ready to go into the other quarterbacks. So just to look at Ryan Applin, the first quarterback under the Hugh Freeze coaching career. In 2011, Arkansas State went out on the field with Ryan Applin, went 10-3 in that year. So I believe this is the year after Gus Malzahn left to come to Auburn. And Applin, 30,588 yards, 19 touchdowns to 16 interceptions. So right off the bat, we're not starting off hot on the turnover train. But rushing wise, he had 588 yards and 10 rushing touchdowns. Then he also had a catch for 23 yards and a touchdown. So Ryan Applin, very much a dual threat quarterback. And from what we know about Payton Thorne, he doesn't. I don't think he chooses to run but he can run if he needs to. There's a lot of highlights that we saw where he did run like I think 10, 15 yards for touchdowns in games. But yeah, Ryan Applin, looking at that, he had several games where he threw 2 or more interceptions, and I mean it's just a typical early on Hugh Freeze quarterback where the interceptions didn't really matter as much as it was winning the game. And 19-16 is not a good touchdown interception ratio in the slightest. You're working very close to getting a 1-1 as your touchdown interception ratio. But overall, a pretty decent year if you look at the yards and touchdowns for Arkansas State in a year that they won the Sun Belt, went 10-3, and made a bowl game, all under Hugh Freeze. And then after that, he went on to Ole Miss, where his first quarterback was Bo Wallace, who never had a season where he had less than 10 interceptions. And I mean, if you go from 2012, he almost had 3,000 yards passing, 22 touchdowns, and 17 interceptions. 2013, 3,346 passing yards, 18 touchdowns, and 10 interceptions. And his final year, 3,194 yards, 22 touchdowns, and 14 interceptions. And now rushing-wise, he never got over 400 rushing yards, 390 in his first year, 355 in year 2, and then, of course, his last year, 199. But overall, he got 19 rushing touchdowns. So we're seeing a trend where you have to be a little bit of a dual threat to work in a Hugh Freeze-led offense. And we're seeing, as it goes along, the interceptions does get less and less as you get closer to 2023. So to move on from the more of the gambler quarterbacks, which was Bo Wallace, who was very much a gambler. He would throw the ball deep down the field all the time. We saw it, I believe it was him against Alabama that almost should have probably thrown an interception, but instead it bounced off of an Alabama defender and landed in the hand of an Ole Miss wide receiver. After Bo Wallace, the quarterbacks kind of got a little less gambly, if that's a word. Chad Kelly, in his 2 years at Ole Miss, year 1 had 4,000 passing yards, 31 touchdowns to 13 interceptions, while also adding 509 yards on the ground and 10 rushing touchdowns in a year where Ole Miss that year went 10-3. And honestly, Chad Kelly probably got a little bit of Heisman. I can't remember that year specifically. I'm trying to remember who won the Heisman that year off the top of my head. It would have been the year before Derrick Henry. So that would have been, oh dear Lord, that's a blast from the past. So 2014, RG3, not RG3. Oh, there's someone I'm missing on. I'll look it up after the show. But yeah, it's a guy who, Chad Kelly kind of slowed down the pace of just throwing the ball deep in the field. 31-13 is a pretty decent ratio, especially for a guy who would be going into his first year as a starting quarterback, just in general. In his first full season. And then you go to year 2, where he kind of had a little bit of a down year. He played less games, dealing with some injuries and I think suspensions too, maybe. It's suspension. I think it was injuries. 2,700 passing yards, 19 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, while adding 5 more on the ground. And a 2-to-1 ratio is probably not the best. It's better than a 1-to-1. By proxy, but it was a bit of a slower year, but less interceptions, the least amount of interceptions thrown thus far up to that point in Hugh Freeze's career. But yeah, you're just seeing that these quarterbacks are just making less and less mistakes. And if you look at that with Payton Thorne, you have a guy who has won 11 games in a season, which is already the best thus far. And yeah, he's thrown, I think, at least 8 interceptions in 4 less games. Yeah, I mean, he's going to throw less interceptions. And I look at it from, I think Chad Kelly's probably, if you don't count Payton Thorne right now, Chad Kelly's the second best quarterback coached by Hugh Freeze, because we're about to get into the next guy in just a quick second. But before that, we are going to go and talk about our sponsor, NordVPN. And this video, if you didn't know, is sponsored by them. Staying safe online is an ever-growing difficulty, and you could be exploited by hackers. NordVPN allows you to change your IP address, making you harder to track and securing your privacy in an ever-growing technological world. It's good to make sure that your family and their privacy is all safe and secure from hackers. And with NordVPN, you can do just that. And right now, NordVPN is giving Auburn Daily listeners and readers a special deal. So if you check out the link in the episode description today, you can go get started and protect your valuables. Online, that is. But yeah, to move on, this is moving on from Ole Miss to now Liberty, where the first quarterback under the Liberty regime was Stephen Calvert, who had a pretty decent year in the first year of Hugh Freeze, where he threw for 3,663 yards, 28 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. And if you go through his game log, he had 4 games overall where he threw an interception. And I mean, out of those 4, 3 of them were 2+, or not 2+, but 3 of them were 2 interceptions. And those 2 interceptions were to Syracuse, Virginia, and Georgia Southern. And I mean, 2 out of those 3 are Power 5 teams. But yeah, a pretty decent year overall for a guy who kind of got overshadowed going into the next year of the Liberty regime. He went 8-5 that year with Hugh Freeze. And then going to 2020, this is when Malik Willis popped off. And this is the guy I would say is probably the best quarterback Hugh Freeze has seen before we see what Payton Thorne can do, or Robby Ashford, or Walker White in the future. Excuse me. So yeah, in 2020, this is going to be the year where you're going to have to step up a little bit. 2,250 yards, which is not the most we've seen. It's pretty close to the bottom, barring any injuries that have happened to the previous quarterbacks. 20 touchdowns, 6 interceptions from Malik Willis, and also adding 944 yards and 14 touchdowns on the ground. And yeah, we're not going to see Payton Thorne put up 1,000 yards rushing. We're not going to see that in the slightest. No, nothing close. And I think you'd be lucky to see him get 10 rushing touchdowns, because he's yet to have done that when he was at Michigan State. And just go game by game. Malik, this is not the right year. It'd be kind of hard to go game by game and to get all the deets on the win where his interceptions came from. But just to go into a little bit of a regressive year for Malik Willis, where he went, he had 2,857 passing yards, 27 touchdowns, 8 to 12 interceptions, and of course led Liberty rushing again with 878 yards and 13 touchdowns on the ground. And just to go by his game by game, he had several games in that year where he had 2 or more interceptions. And I mean, it happens, especially whenever your team, I would say Liberty did get a little worse whenever during that season. They went from 10-1 to 8-5 that year. And I mean, you have such a great year in the first year, and then it just kind of fell off. I wouldn't be too. I'm trying to pull up the game logs because I closed it by accident. Give me 1 second, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, so going through it, the games where he had the least amount, he had the most trouble not throwing interceptions was against Middle Tennessee State, Louisiana Monroe, and Ole Miss. And I think in 2021, that's one of the years that Ole Miss had one of the worst defenses in the SEC. And then, of course, Middle Tennessee State and Louisiana Monroe. And you could bar that up to the fact that Liberty did not have the most talent in the world. But Malik Willis was still just throwing the ball down the field. And 27-12, again, that's another 2-to-1 ratio, 61% completion percentage. Overall, I would still say that Malik Willis is the best quarterback that Hugh Freeze has coached thus far. And then in 2022, it's kind of hard to determine how good the quarterbacks were this year because one of them got hurt. Not hurt, but I think he got hurt, maybe. Yeah, he got hurt. There was a game where he only had 4 passes thrown. But Jonathan Bennett and Caden Salter shared time at the quarterback position, both throwing over 1,000 yards. Jonathan Bennett throwing for 1,500 yards, 12 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. And Caden Salter threw for 1,088 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. Both of those guys also threw under 60% completion percentage. And now you move into the Payton Thorne era. And I mean, we went through his stats a little bit already and just talking about what he could bring. And I've heard from a lot of people that you only need Payton Thorne to be a little bit above average. And I'm going to sound like a bit of a sunshine pumper here, but I think he can be a little bit more than that. I think he can be one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC just because of what we've seen from the flashes at Michigan State. Because Michigan State fell off from 2021 to 2022 because the coaching staff at Michigan State did not do the best job of maintaining the transfer portal. They went all in on 2021, and then it kind of fell off hard in 2022, and they couldn't really recruit back up. And outside of Payton Thorne and Keon Coleman, that offense was just not the best. So I look at it from, I think Payton Thorne could be the best quarterback, and I agree with what he says with the most proven quarterback that he's ever had, because this is a guy who has, at the top of the sport, he's beat the best teams, or he beat Michigan in 2021. But from that standpoint, he's played at one of the best conferences in college football. He's won 11 games in that as well. And he's not a guy who typically makes a lot of mistakes. And when he does, it's usually because he's getting kind of, like a doorman. How they kind of got to let everybody in. That's how his offensive line was. And I say that, and I can say that because as someone who's actively watched Auburn football in the past few years, Auburn's offensive line has been like that. And I look at it from, this could be one of the better O-lines that maybe Hugh Freeze has ever had, outside of maybe the Laramie Tunsil years and all that. But Gunnar Britton, Dylan Wade, Avery Jones, Connor Liu, Xavier Miller, Jaden Muskrat, Tate Johnson, and Jeremy Wright are like beefy, strong, fast, quick offensive linemen that, I got to be honest, Jake Thorne has done a great job of improving this offensive line in his time here at Auburn. And overall, I think this offensive line is going to be exactly what Payton Thorne needs. And it's got to be one of the biggest drawing points to why Payton Thorne came to Auburn. It's finally a coaching staff that is putting their best foot forward and protecting their quarterback in the best way they know how. And with that, if Payton Thorne goes out, if Auburn were to add a couple more transfer portal wide receivers, beef up this wide receiver room, Auburn could surprise a lot of people. And Payton Thorne could probably have one of his best years in his career, and let alone one of the better years we've seen from Auburn quarterback in a hot minute, at least since, I believe, Jarrett Stidham. There we go. At least since Jarrett Stidham in 2017. Because we have an offensive line that we had in 2017. And I think that's the key to it. And looking at it from the wide spectrum of Hugh Freeze quarterbacks, I think if you were to rank them right now, I think Payton Thorne would probably be battling it out for the second place. I mean, before we've seen anything, of course, I would think he would be up there with Chad Kelly in terms of how good he is, with potential to at least get up there with Malik Willis. And maybe hopefully not move down on that list. But overall, I completely agree with what Hugh had to say about it. I do think that Payton Thorne has proven himself more than any other quarterback that he has had, because he's done it at the top of the sport. And I mean, if with proven wise, I mean, Malik Willis was a Heisman contender for the longest time in 2021, or 2020. And if you see it from that standpoint, if that's the most proven you can get for a Hugh Freeze quarterback, Payton Thorne had a Heisman candidate next to him in the backfield. And if you look at it for Auburn, Jarquez Hunter has the potential to reach heights like that as well. But yeah, let me know in the comments, could Payton Thorne be the best quarterback that we've ever seen from a Hugh Freeze offense? And what do you think, or how do you think he's going to perform? If he does win the job, how do you think he's going to perform in 2023? Well, with that, I'm Dylan Larck. I able to tank on Twitter. You can catch me on the College Loop podcast every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, and here every Monday and Wednesday. And with all that being said, thanks for listening to the Auburn Daily Show.